The box still sat open on the floor, its flaps folded neatly like wings. I hadn't even finished unpacking the linens when the phone rang. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered without checking the name. I didn't need to. Only one person called with that tone. Quick, clipped, certain that whatever she said would become fact. "Hey, Evelyn, just a heads up." Madison's voice rushed into my brand new kitchen. "We'll be there in about 2 hours. 20 people from my side of the family. I told them you had the space. If you could get the rooms ready, that would be great. Oh, and food." That was it. No pause, no question, not a single word of congratulations on my new place. She made it sound like a delivery notification instead of an invasion. I stayed silent for a long beat, letting her words settle like dust across the counters. Then I said, "All right," because I've learned something in 63 years. Sometimes the best thing to say when no one's asking for your input is nothing at all. When the call ended, I stood very still, listening to the creak of the cottage's new walls. I had only moved in 3 days ago. The paperwork sat in a folder on the counter, my name fresh on every page. My name, no one else's. And yet somehow Madison had already declared it a family lodge. Her family, to be exact. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. Instead, I walked to the drawer, pulled out a yellow notepad, and flipped it open to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote the date. Then I drew a line down the center. On one side, food, towels, trash bags, sleeping arrangements. On the other, legal, enforcement, copies. I underlined copies twice. The cottage mattered more than just walls or a lake view. It was mine, fully mine. I had saved for years, stitching dresses and hemming coats until my fingers ached, while other women my age booked cruises or talked about retirement. I bought this place with no loans, no co-signers, no shared title. But Madison had always treated my things like community property. If I baked bread, she carried it to her book club. If I bought new towels, she'd say, "Perfect, we needed more." And when my husband Roger passed, my son Daniel had said, "Just stay with us, Mom, until you find your footing." That was 6 years ago. 6 years in their basement, folding their laundry, packing lunches, walking on eggshells. They never charged me rent. Madison loved to point that out, but they collected everything else. My time, my silence, my hands. That's why this house was sacred, not for its size, but for what it represented. A place that was mine, after a lifetime of being told to be flexible. So when Madison declared 20 people were on their way, I didn't panic. I prepared, not with fear, but with calculation. The first van pulled up a little before noon, tires grinding against the gravel drive. 10 minutes later came the second, then a sedan crammed with duffel bags, folding chairs, and people spilling out with the energy of a carnival. I counted as they filed in. 22. Madison had miscounted, or maybe she simply hadn't cared. The greetings were loud, uncoordinated, a mix of half smiles and distracted nods. No hugs, no congratulations on your new home. One cousin waved vaguely while dragging in a rolling suitcase. Another marched straight to the fridge, opening it without asking. They came not with casseroles or flowers, but with Bluetooth speakers, travel mugs, tangled phone chargers, and questions that weren't really questions. "What's the Wi-Fi password? You only have one bathroom downstairs? Don't tell me you don't have oat milk." I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. They moved through the cottage like they'd been here before, like this wasn't a visit, but a takeover. The eldest aunt, Gwen, dropped her purse onto the master bedroom dresser, as if it had been waiting for her. Madison's cousin staked claim to the guest room I had reserved for Daniel's visit next month. 2 teenagers argued over which bed had the better view of the lake. By the time I returned from hanging their coats in the closet, every room had been claimed. I gathered my folded clothes quietly from the larger guest room, moving them down the hall to the smallest space, the one barely big enough for a twin bed and a lamp that flickered when the wind pushed against the wires. No one offered to help. No one asked if I was comfortable giving up my own space. Madison caught me in the hallway, carrying my stack of shirts. She gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind people wear after making a decision for you. "It's just 2 weeks," she said, resting her hand on my shoulder. "Be flexible." I nodded once. Flexibility. I had been living in other people's houses long enough to know what that word really meant. Surrender. It was a compliment only when it benefited the person demanding it. By nightfall, the house throbbed with noise. Someone had spilled grape soda on the porch cushions, then flipped them over and left the stain to seep through. A toddler pressed sticky hands across the glass door, and no one bothered to wipe it clean. Laughter rang through the walls, but it wasn't mine. I went to bed in my small room. Door closed, not in defeat, but in calculation. They thought I had stepped aside. They were wrong. I was stepping back only far enough to draw my line. By the third day, the cottage no longer smelled of fresh paint and cedar. It reeked of takeout containers, spilled beer, and damp towels abandoned in corners. The sink was clogged with someone's hair. A plate from my good china set had been chipped and shoved to the back of the cupboard, as if hiding it would erase the break. I walked from room to room like a shadow, noting every detail. A cracked lamp base in the den. Grease stains smeared across the new curtains. The faucet in the bathroom, once a gentle drip, now snapped completely off after Madison's brother declared he could fix it. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I just wrote it all down. Receipts taped to the page, photographs taken and time-stamped. Everywhere I looked, my property was being consumed, and not one of them seemed to notice. Teenagers blasted music at midnight, their bass rattling the walls. A toddler drew with permanent marker across the hall closet door. Gwen complained the bed in the master was too firm and demanded extra blankets, which she left crumpled on the floor by morning. I cleaned in silence, but not from submission. I cleaned the way a soldier sharpens a blade, methodically, intentionally, preparing for the moment when it will be used. While I swept trail mix crumbs from the carpet, I thought of all the years I had given Madison my hands without recognition. Baking pies for her church gatherings. Sewing Halloween costumes for children who never once said thank you. Cooking for holidays, where my chair was always squeezed into the corner. I remembered Roger's funeral, when I had barely caught my breath before Daniel said, "Just stay with us, Mom, until you find your footing." 6 years later, I was still in their basement, folding laundry that wasn't mine, tiptoeing in a kitchen that never felt like mine. They didn't charge me rent, but they collected something far more costly: my silence, my time, my identity. That history echoed through every slammed door and every careless laugh in my cottage. The disrespect wasn't new, it was only louder now. So on the 5th night, while the house shook with the bass of 2 separate Bluetooth speakers, I stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was sharp, cold enough to clear my thoughts. Beneath my gardening gloves, tucked deep in the drawer, waited the folder I had prepared before they even arrived. Inside it, copies of the county's occupancy codes, a draft of a short-term rental contract, and the card of Deputy Harris, who had assured me he would come if needed. My fingers rested on the folder's edge. I didn't hesitate. This wasn't about hosting anymore. It was about drawing the line that should have been drawn years ago. I had been flexible long enough. Now I would be firm. By the 5th morning, the house felt swollen, like a balloon stretched too thin. Shoes piled at the doorway. Half-empty soda cans lined the porch rail, and laughter echoed down the hallway before the sun was even up. I brewed coffee for myself, not for them, and carried the mug to the dining table. The wood was sticky from someone's spilled juice. I wiped it clean, set my cup down, and opened the folder. The papers I had prepared were neat, clipped together in stacks of 22. Each one carried the same heading: short-term lodging agreement. 3 clear items underneath: $150 per person, per night. All damages billed separately. Full deposit required in advance. Nothing hidden, nothing vague, just structure where chaos had taken root. I placed each copy carefully at the table, laying a pen beside every stack. When I finished, the dining room looked less like a family gathering space and more like an office prepared for signatures. Before taping the notices to the front door, I paused for a long moment. My reflection caught faintly in the glass, lined face, tired eyes, but steady hands. The sign read in bold letters, "Private property, short-term lodging agreement, required for all guests." By the time Madison stumbled into the kitchen in her oversized hoodie, her hair a tangle, I was already seated at the table with my coffee, cooling beside me. She rubbed her eyes, glanced at the papers, and gave a short laugh. "Okay, funny," she said, picking up a page. "What is this, a prank?" I met her gaze without blinking. "A lodging agreement." Her laugh snapped shut. "You're serious?" "Yes." She stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. "You can't actually think you're going to charge family for staying here." "Not family," I said quietly. "Guests, and guests pay." Her mouth opened, but before she could argue further, the crunch of gravel outside drew our eyes to the window. Right on time. Deputy Harris stepped out of his cruiser, hat low against the morning wind. He'd promised me punctuality, and he kept his word. When he entered, he nodded politely. "Morning, Mrs. Carter. This the group you mentioned?" Madison's face went pale. "You called the police on us," I corrected her gently. "No, I called the county office. This is enforcement." Silence thickened. The clatter of someone dropping a spoon in the kitchen froze midair. The deputy glanced at the notices on the door, then at the neat stack of papers on the table. "Everyone will need to sign or vacate by this evening," he said. For the first time in years, I felt the balance tilt back toward me. The dining room filled with noise, but it wasn't laughter this time. It was outrage. Chairs scraped across the floor as Madison's relatives circled the table, waving the contracts like they were poison. "You think you can charge us like some hotel?" Aunt Gwen barked, her voice sharp as a whip. "We're family." I folded my hands in front of me. "No, you are Madison's family, not mine, and you've never treated me as yours." A cousin muttered, "She's lost her mind," and another scoffed under his breath. But Deputy Harris didn't flinch. He stood with the arms crossed, scanning the group like a school teacher waiting for silence. "Actually," he said, his voice steady, "this is perfectly lawful, Mrs. Carter gave verbal and written notice. These are not guests. These are occupants without permission." The words dropped like stones into the room. Madison tried to recover, her voice cracking. "Mom, come on. This is unnecessary. They're just staying a little while." I turned to her, holding her gaze. "A little while? They've taken my rooms, broken my things, and filled my house with noise. A guest respects the space they enter. This," I gestured around us, at the overturned cushions and sticky counters, "isn't respect, it's consumption." Her face flushed, a mix of anger and fear. "You recorded me, didn't you? You actually saved that phone call?" "Yes." I said it plain, without apology. "And the text messages, the emails, the complaints from neighbors, everything." Deputy Harris flipped through my folder, nodding slowly. "Documented, organized, and time-stamped," he confirmed. A young cousin snorted. "This is insane. You're treating us like criminals." "No," I said. "I'm treating you the way you've treated me for years, as if I'm only here to be used. The difference is, I have the paperwork to prove otherwise." The room went quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't last long, just enough for the weight of truth to settle. Aunt Gwen slammed her palm on the table. "This is betrayal. Blood doesn't do this to blood." I straightened my shoulders. "You're right, but I stopped pretending that silence was love. And I won't fold myself into nothing just to keep you comfortable." Madison looked around the room, waiting for someone to speak on her behalf. No one did. Her relatives shifted uneasily, muttering, their bravado already slipping. Deputy Harris laid the papers flat on the table. "Sign and stay, or refuse and leave. Those are the only options." I picked up a pen and placed it in front of Madison. "Choice is yours," I said calmly. "But either way, my line has been drawn." By late afternoon, the house no longer rang with arrogance. It rang with the sounds of departure. Suitcases thudding downstairs, closet doors slamming, drawers yanked open in a rush. Voices dropped from smug to bitter. A low hiss of complaints carried through the halls. One cousin dragged a duffel bag across the hard wood, leaving a long scuff mark. Another knocked over a flower pot on the porch, shards scattering across the steps. No apology, no pause. Just the sound of feet moving faster. I stood in the doorway, with the clipboard pressed against my chest, watching them shuffle past in waves, folding chairs crammed into trunks, pillows stuffed against windows, doors slamming harder than necessary. From an upstairs window, a teenager leaned out and shouted, "You'll die alone." His words rang down the driveway like a final insult hurled from a retreating army. I didn't flinch, I didn't blink. By sunset, the two vans were filled again, engines growling impatiently. Madison stormed toward me, arms crossed tight, her face flushed. Daniel trailed behind her, eyes dark with a heaviness I'd seen before, the look of a man caught between loyalty and guilt. Madison stopped at the bottom step, glaring up at me. "You made this hostile." I held her stare and answered with quiet steadiness, "No. I made it fair." Daniel looked at me, lips parting, like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. He climbed into the van beside her, shut the door, and stared straight ahead. I stood there until the last car turned down the gravel road and disappeared around the bend. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't taken. The house behind me sagged with the weight of their absence. Sheets torn half off the beds, towels crumpled in the bathroom, crumbs ground into the carpet. But I didn't step inside right away. I stood at the gate, clipboard heavy in my hands. Not heavy from paper, but from the choice I had finally made. For years I had been flexible, yielding, bending until I nearly broke. Tonight, for the first time, I was unyielding. The house, my house, stood behind me in quiet solidarity. I turned back toward the porch, climbed the steps, and laid the clipboard on the table, where their half-empty soda cans had once sat. The candle I'd been saving waited by the sink. I struck a match, lit the wick, and let the small flame glow against the darkening windows. For the first time in over a week, the silence belonged to me. The morning after they left, the cottage looked like a battlefield. Pizza crusts abandoned on window sills, towels soaked and crumpled in corners. Someone's makeup bag tipped over in the bathroom sink, a cloud of powder coating the porcelain. The porch cushions reeked of grape soda, and the faucet still dripped steadily onto the bathroom floorboards, warped now from water damage. I didn't touch a thing. Instead, I called a cleaning service. 2 women arrived by noon, kind and efficient, their smiles softening the wreckage around us. I made them tea, showed them each room, and left them to their work. While they scrubbed, I took photographs, every stain, every crack, every broken plate. I logged times, marked damages, taped receipts into a neat file. Each click of the camera felt less like cleaning up and more like reclaiming the truth that had been denied me for years. By late afternoon, the cottage was beginning to breathe again, windows thrown open to let the wind carry out the stale smell of strangers. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and typed a message with no hesitation. Subject line: "Final statement for your stay." Attached was a detailed invoice, charges for damages, fees for cleaning, and copies of the short-term rental agreements, each signed, in bold, impatient strokes, I recognized as Madison's. She had signed without reading closely, convinced it was a bluff. Now the ink carried weight she hadn't anticipated. At the bottom of the invoice, I wrote only one sentence: "This is not punishment, it is accounting. Respect," tallied in dollars and cents. I hit send. An hour later, my phone buzzed with the first message. Madison's name lit the screen. "You're unbelievable. Family doesn't do this." The next came minutes after. "We'll see about this. You won't get away with it." I didn't reply. Then Daniel's text arrived, short, careful, his words tight and neat, like his handwriting when he was a boy, afraid of smudging his school papers. I hope you realize how cold this was. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment, then placed it down. His words weren't a surprise. Guilt was the currency of control, and I had spent too much of my life paying it. That night, I pulled his note from the envelope he'd left behind. I read it once, just that single line, and fed it to the fireplace. The paper curled quickly, flames eating away the edges, like they were hungry to erase it. I didn't cry. I didn't look for softness between the syllables. I watched the fire until nothing remained but ash. By the time the cleaners left, the house gleamed again, smelling faintly of lemon oil and fresh air. Neighbors I hadn't met before stopped by with a tin of muffins. They didn't ask questions. They just smiled and said, "Welcome." And for the first time in years, I believed it. In the days that followed, the cottage grew quieter, not in emptiness, but in restoration. The wind carried the smell of pine through open windows. My laundry basket stayed empty. My sink, once stacked high with other people's dishes, shone clean under the morning light. I changed the locks, not out of spite, but out of clarity. The porch sign that once read "Welcome" now carried a new message: by appointment only. The guest room was tidy again, but no longer prepared for anyone who arrived uninvited. For once, I wasn't pretending to be available. When I met with my lawyer, we updated the deed, not the ownership that was already mine, but the clause that would decide its future. One sentence, plain and binding: inheritance is contingent upon demonstrated respect. My son and Madison might not understand it now, but respect is not given automatically to those who share blood. It is earned moment by moment, choice by choice. Madison called twice more. Her texts arrived in bursts, one polite, one sharp, another that simply read, "We needed to talk." Daniel's message followed soon after. "Can we clear the air? It's been long enough." I didn't answer, not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was finished. For years I had mistaken endurance for love, silence for peace, but silence without respect is just erasure. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the last light stretch across the lake. The wind chimes I'd finally hung swayed gently, their sound soft and unforced. For so long, I had lived like those chimes tied down, expected to move whenever someone else pulled the string. Now they moved only when the wind allowed. The cottage didn't feel too big, it felt just right. I cooked for myself, grocery shopped without anyone else's preferences weighing on my list, and planted lavender in the garden beds Madison's relatives had trampled. The plants stood tall again, purple blossoms leaning into the sun. Neighbors waved as they passed, some stopping with kind words, others simply nodding in quiet recognition. I didn't feel lonely, I felt unburdened. Choosing peace doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with stillness, the kind that fills your chest slowly and makes your shoulders drop an inch lower. The kind that tells you you're safe, finally, because you've stopped waiting for approval to live your own life. As I closed the folder of notarized pages and slid it into the drawer beside the spare keys, I felt no weight, only certainty. My house wasn't a doormat, and neither was I. The flame from the candle on the table flickered gently, casting warm light across the walls. For the first time, I sat not to clean, not to defend, but simply to exist. And the quiet wasn't empty, it was mine.